The mercenary ship, a sleek, armored vessel built for destruction, glided silently toward the remote planet. Its crew, a band of deadly killers from different corners of the galaxy, had seen it all. They had fought enormous beasts, wiped out whole armies, and survived battles on Deathworlds where no one else could. But this mission was different. This time, they were being called to eliminate a target that didn't seem to fit the usual mold of enemy. The crew had been briefed on the human they were after, a lone survivor, a man who had reportedly survived a series of hostile encounters that had wiped out entire squads. The kind of survivor who never gave up, no matter the odds. It was strange to think of a human this way. Humans were weak, fragile compared to the towering alien species they'd encountered in their travels. The thought of an ordinary human being able to outlast their most experienced warriors sent a shiver down their spines. They had heard whispers, rumors that humans were different, that they had something within them that made them dangerous. But the mercenaries had never taken it seriously. Humans were supposed to be easy targets, but now it was time to put that theory to the test. Captain Icar, the leader of the mercenary team, stood at the front of the ship, his arms crossed. His face was hardened, an expression of confidence and calm. He had led countless successful missions, and he wasn't about to let some human stop him now. But even he couldn't shake the unease in the air, an unease he couldn't quite explain. His second in command, a tall and intimidating alien named Sorek, stood beside him, scanning the planet's surface through the ship's view screen. "We're close," Sorek said. His voice was gravelly, like rocks scraping together, and there was a hint of something unsettling in his tone. "I don't like this, Captain." "Focus, Sorek," Icar replied firmly, though the unease had begun to settle into his own mind. "We've handled worse. One human won't be a problem." But even as he spoke, the feeling grew stronger. They were nearing their target, and there was something about this mission that didn't sit right. Icar pushed the thoughts aside and activated the ship's descent. The ground below them was a barren wasteland, devoid of any signs of life. At least, that's what it appeared to be at first. As the ship touched down, there was an eerie silence that enveloped the crew. No wildlife, no sounds of movement. It was like the entire world had been abandoned. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the kind of planet they were used to. The mercenaries quickly disembarked, their weapons at the ready, scanning their surroundings. They moved in a formation, staying tight and alert. There was no cover, no shelter, just the harsh, rocky terrain stretching endlessly in every direction. Captain Icar motioned for them to move forward, his eyes scanning the barren landscape as they advanced. There was no sign of their target, no indication of where the human might be hiding. Minutes passed, and the silence weighed heavily on them. Not a sound, not a movement. Then, just as Icar was about to signal for them to regroup, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby cliff. It was a human, but not just any human. This man was older than they had anticipated, his face rugged and scarred, but his eyes, those eyes were piercing, filled with a calm intensity that sent a chill through the mercenaries. He didn't look like someone who was afraid. In fact, he didn't look like someone who was even remotely worried. He stood there, just watching them, as though he had been expecting them. The mercenaries froze, unsure of how to react. The man didn't speak at first. He simply observed them, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, there was no movement, no noise, just an unspoken tension between the two sides. Captain Icar was the first to break the silence. "You're the one we're here for." His voice was steady, though there was a slight edge to it. He had dealt with some of the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, and he knew the importance of keeping a cool head. But this human, it was as if the rules of engagement had suddenly shifted. The man's lips twitched into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "I am," he said, his voice calm and steady. There was no fear in it, no sign of hesitation. "I suppose you've come to kill me." Icar's hand twitched near his weapon. He had expected fear, begging, maybe even an attempt at surrender. But this human was different. He didn't look like someone who was ready to die. He looked like someone who was prepared to fight. "You don't seem worried." Sorek spoke up, his voice laced with suspicion. He stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the human. "You're alone, outnumbered, and you've been hiding out here. Why don't you beg for your life? I'm sure we could make this quick for you." The human's eyes flickered to Sorek, then back to Ikar. "Begging for my life isn't something I do," he said simply, his voice calm, almost indifferent. Ikar's eyebrows furrowed. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. Most of their targets begged for mercy. Most of them crumbled when faced with overwhelming force. But this human, he was different. He wasn't intimidated by them. He wasn't even angry. He was just unbothered. "All right then," Ikar said, his voice sharp. "If you won't beg, we'll give you a chance. Fight. But know this, no one has ever survived when we've come for them. No one." The human's gaze darkened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. "I've survived much worse than you," he said quietly. "And I'll survive this too." The tension in the air thickened as the mercenaries prepared for the worst. They had fought monsters, they had battled armies, but there was something about this human that made them uneasy. This wasn't like any other target they had faced. Ikar motioned for his team to advance, signaling them to close in. But as they did, the human moved with an almost unnatural speed. In a blur of motion, he shifted positions, disappearing into the rocky landscape before any of the mercenaries could react. "What the—" Sorek began, but his words were cut off by the sound of a distant crash. One of the mercenaries, an alien sniper named Drak, had been taken out in an instant. He hadn't even seen the attack coming. It was as though the human had vanished and reappeared in the blink of an eye. Ikar's eyes widened. This wasn't possible. Humans weren't supposed to be this fast, this deadly. He had underestimated them. He had underestimated him. Another crash echoed, and another mercenary went down. This time, it was Varn, a hulking brute who had never been taken by surprise. Varn fell without a sound, his body crumpling to the ground, blood pooling around him. The mercenaries began to panic. They had faced Deathworlders before, but this human was different. They had never encountered anything like this. No one had. Ikar's heart raced. He motioned for his remaining team to fall back. But before they could retreat, the human appeared in front of them, blocking their path. He wasn't standing still. He was moving, faster than any of them could follow. His eyes were cold, calculating, like he knew exactly what to do to make them doubt everything they thought they knew about combat. "Why are you running?" the human asked, his voice low but filled with an eerie calm. "You came here to kill me. You came to hunt me. But now, you're the ones running." The mercenaries froze, their weapons shaking in their hands. It was the first time in their careers that they had been reduced to this. The prey. The fear was palpable. This human wasn't just a target. He was a predator. And in that moment, they knew they had made a grave mistake. The human smiled, a brief flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. "You should have stayed in your own territory," he said, almost kindly, before vanishing into the shadows once again. The mercenaries were left standing in stunned silence, realizing that they were no longer the hunters. In the blink of an eye, they had become the hunted, and as they heard the footsteps of the human drawing closer, they realized something far more terrifying than anything they had faced before. They had just discovered why even killers run from Deathworlders. The remaining mercenaries stood frozen in the still, barren wasteland. The silence around them was deafening. The human had vanished, and now all they had left were the echoes of their own breathing and the unsettling realization that they were not the apex predators in this landscape. The battlefield had shifted, and for the first time, they had become the prey. Captain Ikar gritted his teeth, trying to maintain his composure. He scanned the area, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His team was down to only a few members now, and they hadn't even managed to land a single hit on the human. That shouldn't have been possible. He had faced beasts that tore through whole squads, ruthless alien armies that slaughtered without hesitation, but nothing had ever made him feel this way. This fear was different. "We need to regroup," Icar barked, his voice sharp. He didn't want to show it, but the panic was beginning to rise. This was the first time they were truly out of their depth. "Check your weapons. We can't afford to make another mistake." Sorek, the towering alien second in command, nodded solemnly, his expression grim. "Captain, this human is no ordinary target. I've fought creatures that could tear through steel, beasts that could crush ships with their bare hands, but nothing has ever felt like this before. I don't know what kind of human we're dealing with, but we need to rethink our strategy." Icar glanced at the rest of his team. Only 4 of them remained. Sorek, himself, a sharpshooter named Rhea, and a combat specialist named Jad. All seasoned killers, all hardened by years of war and bloodshed. But even they were beginning to show cracks in their composure. "I agree," Icar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This human, he's something else. We've underestimated him. We've underestimated humans." The team had always thought of humans as weak. Just another species in a universe full of far superior beings. They had never thought of them as threats. They had thought of them as simple, fragile creatures who could be easily wiped out, crushed under the weight of the galaxy's most powerful forces. But now, standing in the middle of a desolate planet, with 2 of their own already dead, they had come to a terrifying realization. They had been wrong. The human who had faced them was not some weakling. He wasn't just surviving by chance. He was strong. Strong in ways the mercenaries hadn't imagined. His adaptability, his unshakable will, and his ability to fight back had thrown them off balance. This wasn't a human they were fighting. This was a Deathworlder. A human who had been forged by one of the harshest environments in the galaxy, Earth. The reality of what they were facing started to sink in as they slowly began to move forward, weapons raised. The human might have disappeared for now, but they knew he was out there, watching them. They were being hunted. "Stay alert," Icar ordered, his voice tense. "We don't know where he'll strike next, and this time, we're not making the same mistake." As they moved through the rocky landscape, a low sound broke the silence. A faint, almost imperceptible crunching sound underfoot. Rhea, the sharpshooter, was the first to notice it. She raised her hand, signaling for the others to stop. The team froze. "What is that?" Rhea whispered, her eyes scanning the terrain. She had the sharpest eyes on the squad, able to spot movement from miles away. But even she couldn't find the source of the noise. Icar stepped forward cautiously, signaling for Sorek to cover him. They moved in silence, trying to keep their presence as minimal as possible. Every step felt heavy, as if the very air around them was thick with tension. They could feel it now, the presence of the human, as if he was watching them from every shadow, from every angle. Then, in a blur of motion, something rushed toward them. Icar didn't have time to react. Before he knew it, the human appeared in front of them like a phantom. In a flash, he disarmed Rhea, knocking her weapon to the ground with a swift motion, and then spun around to face the rest of the team. It all happened so quickly. Sorek, in an instinctive move, lunged at the human, his massive arms reaching out to grab the fragile human's throat. But the human was faster. He ducked and twisted, a sudden shift in position that sent Sorek stumbling forward, off balance. It was a move so fluid, so precise, it was as if the human had anticipated Sorek's every action. "Damn it," Sorek growled, spinning around to face the human again. He swung a fist toward him with deadly force, but the human was gone, vanishing into the shadows once more. The mercenaries began to regroup, their hearts pounding. They had barely even seen him move. They had heard the stories. Humans, Deathworlders, capable of things that no ordinary species could do. But seeing it in action, it was something else entirely. They weren't just dealing with a skilled fighter. They were dealing with a force of nature. Icare clenched his fists, his mind racing. They couldn't keep running. They couldn't keep hiding. They had to fight back. They had to figure out what made this human tick, what made him so dangerous, and use it against him. But how? How do you fight something that doesn't show fear? How do you fight something that is already prepared for every move you make? Then the human spoke. You really think you can win, don't you? The voice was calm, almost mocking. It came from behind them, from an unseen corner of the rocky outcrop. The mercenaries whipped around, but there was no sign of him. Where are you? Icare shouted. His voice echoed through the empty landscape, but the only response was the sound of wind sweeping across the barren earth. I've already won, the human's voice came again, this time from somewhere behind Icare. You just don't realize it yet. Icare's eyes widened. This wasn't just a physical battle. It was psychological. The human was trying to break them, to make them question their every move, their every plan. They weren't fighting a simple target. They were fighting something that thrived on their fear, on their hesitation. This human wasn't just trying to survive. He was making them doubt everything they had ever known about combat. You've made a grave mistake, the human continued. You should have stayed on your ship. You should have stayed far away from my planet. Now you're going to see why we are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Icare's heart pounded as the words settled in. This human, this Deathworlder, wasn't just trying to escape. He was going to make them pay for underestimating him. They had become the prey in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And as the human's footsteps echoed in the distance, the mercenaries knew one thing for sure. They were about to face the fight of their lives. The mercenaries moved with desperate caution as the human continued to stalk them from the shadows. They could feel him, his presence, always there, just beyond the reach of their weapons. They were used to being the ones who controlled the battlefield, but now, for the first time in their lives, they were the ones on the back foot. They had been hunted by predators before, but this was something different. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was something much more personal. Captain Icare led the group, his mind racing. Every instinct he had as a seasoned warrior told him to keep pushing forward, to confront the human head-on. But now he hesitated. He couldn't shake the feeling that every move they made was playing right into the human's hands. They had to think differently. Sorak, cover the left flank. Jad, take point. Icare ordered, his voice tight with tension. Rhea, keep your eyes on the high ground. Don't let him surprise you again. His team moved into position. But even as they did, Icare knew it was only a matter of time before the human made his move again. The mercenaries were no longer in control. They were reacting. And reacting was a dangerous thing to do when the enemy had the upper hand. The barren wasteland around them seemed to close in, the rocky landscape stretching out in every direction like an endless maze. It was as if the very planet itself was conspiring against them. There was no escape, no shelter, no way to hide. And that was when the human made his next move. A single shot rang out, cutting through the air like a knife. Rhea's body jerked, and she collapsed to the ground with a gasp. Blood pooled around her as she struggled for breath, her weapon slipping from her hand. The team froze, horror spreading across their faces. I've told you, the human's voice echoed across the field, calm and detached. You can't hide. You can't run. You can't even fight me. Captain Icare clenched his jaw, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. Rhea was down, possibly dead, and they were no closer to stopping the human. This wasn't a fight they could win. The human was too fast, too precise. They couldn't keep up with him. And yet, they had to try. They couldn't leave now. Not with Rhea's life on the line. Fall back to the ship, Icare ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. He turned and began moving swiftly toward the mercenary vessel, his team following him with hurried footsteps. But as they moved, The ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, just a faint vibration, like the air was thickening. But then it grew, spreading quickly, until the ground began to shake violently. The mercenaries stumbled, struggling to maintain their balance. Something was happening, something worse than just being hunted. Sorak grunted in pain as he stumbled and fell to one knee. "What is this?" he growled. "Is this the humans doing?" "No." Akar's voice trailed off. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. It wasn't just the human who was playing with them. The entire planet was reacting to their presence. It was as if the land itself was coming alive, resisting them, rejecting them. From the distant hills, a massive rumble filled the air. Suddenly, the ground erupted, sending a shockwave through the mercenaries. Large, jagged rocks shot into the sky as a monstrous form appeared from beneath the surface. It was massive, too large to be anything they had ever seen before. Its body was a mass of shifting scales, jagged claws, and eyes that burned with an intense predatory glow. A giant creature, its body writhing with power, let out a roar that shook the very earth. The mercenaries could feel its presence even before it revealed itself, the air growing heavy with the unmistakable scent of death. It was a creature born of the planet itself, and it had been lying in wait. Ikar's heart hammered in his chest as the realization hit him. This planet, this barren wasteland, wasn't empty. It wasn't a place to be taken lightly. This was a death world, a world where life itself fought back against invaders. And now they had become the invaders. The creature turned its massive head toward them, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth, each one capable of tearing through solid rock. The mercenaries could feel the weight of its gaze, its hunger. This was no ordinary beast. It was an apex predator, and it was just as much a part of the human's domain as the human was. "Move," Ikar shouted, his voice desperate. "Back to the ship. Now." But the creature was too fast. With a roar that split the air, it lunged toward them, its claws sweeping through the air, sending rocks and debris flying in every direction. The mercenaries barely managed to dodge the creature's strike, but they knew it was only a matter of time before one of them was caught. Zod, the combat specialist, managed to fire a few shots at the creature, but they bounced off its armored hide with no effect. The creature let out a growl of annoyance and swiped its claw at him, sending the mercenary flying through the air like a ragdoll. Zod landed with a sickening crunch, his body limp and lifeless. "Damn it!" Ikar cursed under his breath. "This is insane. We can't fight this thing." "We don't need to fight it," Sorak growled, his voice filled with a dangerous calm. He turned to Ikar, his eyes filled with determination. "We just need to survive long enough to get to the ship. Then let's move." Ikar barked, his voice filled with urgency. The remaining mercenaries sprinted toward their ship, the creature hot on their heels. It roared in fury, its massive feet pounding the ground as it chased after them, its claws scraping against the rocky surface. Every step felt like it would be their last. Ikar felt his pulse quicken as he reached the ship, his hands fumbling with the controls to open the hatch. But as he neared the entrance, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down and saw a massive claw embedded in his side, piercing through his armor and into his flesh. He gasped in pain, but before he could react, the creature's roar drowned out everything. It was too late. They had underestimated everything. The human, the planet, the death world itself. And now, as the claws of the creature closed in around him, Ikar realized the truth. They hadn't just encountered a human. They had encountered something far worse. They had encountered a Deathworlder. The last of the mercenaries, now dwindling in numbers and morale, had only one option left: escape. They had tried everything. They had fought with everything they had. And yet, they were not only losing the battle with the human, they were losing the battle with the very planet they had stepped onto. Captain Ikar, now barely holding on to consciousness after the vicious strike, felt the weight of his failing body. His vision blurred, and every breath came with excruciating pain. He tried to push the thoughts of his impending death out of his mind, but there was no escaping the truth. The creature had him, and the planet had won. With one final burst of energy, Icar staggered toward the ship's entrance, his hand shaking as he grasped the control panel. His blood soaked the floor beneath him, and every movement became more sluggish than the last. He heard the sound of the creature behind him, its thunderous steps getting closer. If he could just get inside, just get to the ship, they could escape. They could still survive. But as he reached for the ship's controls, a voice suddenly rang out, calm, steady, and filled with an unmistakable sense of power. "Are you trying to escape, Captain?" It was the human. Icar's heart pounded in his chest. There was no way. He'd been sure the human was still somewhere in the wilderness, waiting for the right moment. How had he managed to get so close without Icar noticing? The human had been playing them this entire time, pushing them toward their destruction step by step. Turning slowly, Icar could barely make out the silhouette of the human, standing on a rocky outcrop a few meters away. The human's posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, focused, as though he knew exactly what Icar was thinking. He could feel the pressure building in the air, the weight of it dragging him down even more. You monster," Icar spat, his voice ragged, blood dripping from his mouth. "You'll never leave this planet. No one will ever fear you again." The human's smile was small, almost unreadable, but there was a distinct coldness to it. "That's where you're wrong, Captain. You see, humans don't need to be feared to be dangerous. We don't fight for glory or dominance. We fight to survive. And when we survive, we win." Icar's body quivered with both pain and frustration. How could a simple human, so fragile, so weak in comparison to the vast, ruthless mercenary forces, have been so effective? The human had reduced them to this pathetic state, one step away from death, all while playing a game they could never understand. This was no simple warrior they were facing. This was something far worse. This was a force of nature. As Icar struggled to remain conscious, the human stepped forward, the sound of his boots crunching against the rocky ground like the ticking of a clock. Every step felt like an eternity to Icar, each one pulling him deeper into the realization that he had been wrong. So terribly wrong. The human was not just another species to be dismissed. The human was a survivor, a Deathworlder, capable of things no one could comprehend. "You don't understand, do you?" the human said, almost pityingly. "I didn't even want to fight you, Captain. I didn't come here for war. But you brought this on yourself. You came to my world with the belief that you could conquer it, conquer me. But you don't realize that you're not the first to make this mistake, and you won't be the last." Icar could barely raise his head, but he did so, gazing into the eyes of the human. For a moment, it felt like time slowed, and Icar saw something in those eyes. Something cold, something ancient. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was the relentless calm of a species that had faced death time and time again, yet had never surrendered. The human didn't need to prove anything. He had already won. "I will die, and you will die with me," Icar muttered, his voice barely audible. "The galaxy will know what you did here." The human's eyes narrowed, and he took a slow step forward, the air around him thick with an unmistakable sense of finality. "I don't think you understand," the human said softly, his tone devoid of emotion. "You won't die. You'll never die. You'll be forgotten. All of you. Your species will be remembered as nothing more than a stepping stone. My planet, my home, will continue long after you're gone. And when the galaxy looks back at this moment, they won't remember your names. They'll remember what happens when you try to invade a death world." Icar wanted to speak, but the words failed him. His body had given up, his vision blurring into darkness. The human's presence, his words, and the weight of everything they had done pressed down on him, suffocating him. I thought we could win, Icar whispered, before the darkness took over completely. The human stood over the mercenary captain, watching as the last of his life drained away. It wasn't a victory to gloat over. There was nothing to celebrate here. This was the harsh reality of a death world. This was the world that had birthed humanity, forged in a crucible of survival that no alien empire could ever hope to understand. The human looked down at Icar one last time, then turned toward the ship. The mercenaries had failed to escape, and it wasn't because of superior weapons or tactics. It was because they had underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, the will to survive. As the sun began to set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the human took a slow breath. He had won, but the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning, and the galaxy would learn soon enough what happened when humans were pushed too far. No one could stand against a Deathworlder. Not for long. The human stood silently amidst the wreckage, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene as the last remnants of the mercenary group lay sprawled across the battlefield. The once proud mercenaries, who had believed they could conquer anything in the galaxy, had been defeated, not by overwhelming force, but by something far more powerful, the sheer, unrelenting will to survive that flowed through every fiber of humanity. The ground beneath his boots still trembled slightly from the impact of the colossal creature that had risen from the earth, the Deathworld's final response to the intrusion of foreign invaders. Its massive form had fallen not long ago, after a final brutal confrontation with the remaining mercenaries who had foolishly tried to fight it. The creature had been just another part of this unforgiving planet, and the human had long since learned that Deathworlds didn't offer mercy. Not to anyone. The human crouched by Icar, the last of the mercenaries to fall. He studied the captain's lifeless eyes, the final remnants of defiance fading from his face. Despite the ruthlessness of the mercenaries' actions, there was something almost tragic about the last moments of a soldier who had realized too late that his entire worldview had been shattered. It was the same fate that had befallen countless other invaders before them. The human's thoughts drifted briefly to the many battles he had fought in the name of survival. The galaxy had a long history of underestimating humanity. The alien species, with their advanced technology and superior strength, had assumed that humans were nothing more than a fleeting threat, a species too young, too fragile to stand up to the ancient empires of the stars. But humanity had a strength they couldn't comprehend. They had faced death countless times, survived impossible odds, and adapted in ways that no other species could. It wasn't about weapons or technology. It was about something far more primal. The mercenaries had come here thinking they could break humanity, but instead they had become another lesson in why humans were to be feared. Not because they were the strongest physically, but because they were relentless. And they never, ever gave up. The human wiped the blood from his hands and stood. He had no time to mourn the mercenaries. They were no more than a stepping stone in the larger scheme of things. As powerful as they were, they had been nothing compared to the galaxy's true threat. The complacency of species that believed their dominance would last forever. And humanity had shown them, in the harshest way possible, just how fragile their power truly was. Turning his gaze to the horizon, the human could see the faint outline of the mercenary ship in the distance. The crew that had attempted to escape earlier, the ones who had thought they could outpace the wrath of this death world, had already been dealt with by the planet itself. The ship had long been rendered inoperable, its systems fried by the same planetary force that had obliterated the mercenaries. He sighed, brushing away the remnants of the battle, his expression unreadable. The chaos, the violence, it was all over now. For the mercenaries, anyway. But the work wasn't done. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson today, and the human's eyes narrowed as he thought of what would come next. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message that humanity would never be underestimated again. The human took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. He didn't need to look back at the remains of the mercenary force. He already knew that the galaxy would soon learn what it meant to face humanity, and what it meant to provoke a Deathworlder. He had been patient, watching the galaxy play its game of power and war. He had watched as species bent the galaxy to their will, assuming that their technology, their numbers, or their supposed superiority would make them invincible. But now, the rules were changing. Now, humanity had stepped onto the stage in full force. And the galaxy, for all its might, would soon learn that there was something more terrifying than the universe's greatest armies, something that could not be stopped, no matter how hard they tried to push back. The human reached out, touching the cold surface of a jagged rock, and paused, as if listening to the planet itself. The wind swept through the barren land, and the ground shifted slightly beneath his feet. It was as though the planet was alive, aware of its own power. And the human knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was just the beginning. The galaxy would tremble. It would react to the awakening of a force that had been dormant for too long. A force that would no longer tolerate being overlooked or brushed aside. A force that would never back down from a fight. Humanity had spoken, and the galaxy had no choice but to listen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the human moved forward. He was no longer just a single figure standing against the galaxy. He was the embodiment of something much greater, a harbinger of the changes that were to come. The old rules were dead. The new ones were just beginning. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The human continued walking, the wind howling behind him as the final remnants of the mercenaries' intrusion vanished into the dust. Soon, the galaxy would realize that when humans decided to speak, they didn't just talk. They conquered. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming.